The meeting was remarkable. I sat in his presence and I immediately went into samadhi. He looked at me, he glanced at me. There was a transmission from his eyes, light came from his eyes, entered into my heart. And really the only way to describe the indescribable is my heart exploded. My mother and father were originally opposed to my running away and living in an ashram. So many people in the 60s were renouncing the world and going to India and living in ashrams. And very devout Catholic family, and they were very opposed to my being in an ashram. I had traveled the world. I'd been to 75 countries. I was studying with the Rosicrucian Fellowship correspondence course, and the last lesson after 2 years, the final lesson was, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And that week, my yoga teacher invited me to travel with her from New York City to California to meet her guru. And I had time, I was available. So we went in a 9-car caravan cross country and meditated together every day. And we arrived at the ashram, and the next morning I went to meet him, and the meeting was remarkable. I sat in his presence and I immediately went into samadhi. He looked at me, he glanced at me. There was a transmission from his eyes, light came from his eyes, entered into my heart. And really the only way to describe the indescribable is my heart exploded, just opened wide. And I was filled with a love that I'd never even imagined before. I was just madly, ecstatically in love with everyone and everything. The room was filled with light. I had no thoughts in my mind, and I sat in meditation for about 3 hours. He had me sit over on the side of the wall. When I came out of the meditation, I was the only one there. Everyone else had left. They allowed me to sit, and that began my sadhana. I immediately moved into the ashram and stayed with Muktananda, with him and in his ashram for the next 8 years, doing sadhana, meditating daily, chanting, doing yoga, selfless service, and really devoted myself full time to the pursuit of the experience of the self. When I met him, I was on crutches. I had crippling rheumatoid arthritis. I had rheumatoid arthritis in my feet, my knees, my elbows, even my back was fused. And I used to, this was at the age of 25, I had to take cortisone injections to manage the pain, utazolidine pills every day. And the prognosis was that I would only get worse. Once I got Shaktipat, the Kundalini energy became very active and very dynamic in my physical body. And every time I would sit for meditation, I would begin to spontaneously experience what we call kriyas. Kriyas are movements of energy, movements of the awakened Shakti for the purpose of purification. My body would begin to move. My neck would rotate, go back and forth, swaying, hatha yoga postures. And this continued for about 9 months, where every time I would sit to meditate spontaneously, my body would respond with these physical kriyas. And sometimes when I would be meditating, my neck would be moving so fast like this, I was afraid my neck would fall off. I would hear all the bones cracking. It was loud. It was a little bit frightening at the first until I found out what it was. But the end result was that after a period of 9 months, I threw the crutches away and was able to walk. I've never had even an inkling of that arthritis returning. I returned to see my original doctor when I was in New York City, and he said he'd never seen anything like it. It was a spontaneous remission of rheumatoid arthritis, and it's never returned. So I was perfectly aware of the transformation that was taking place in my life. And I've just really described the physical changes, but the spiritual changes were enormous. Just on a daily basis, revelations, visions, miracles, all sorts of things were happening. All of the religions are pointing at the same truth from different angles. So describing it, we're trying to describe the ultimate truth, which is beyond words, beyond description, in a three-dimensional reality where words are symbols of things. So each tradition has its own ways of describing the indescribable. You know, in India, they have this parable that they use of the six blind men trying to describe the elephant. So one is holding onto his nose and he's saying, oh, it's like a long tube, and somebody else is holding onto the leg. Oh, it's like a big tree trunk, and someone else is holding onto the tail, and oh, it's like a broom swishing. So they're all describing the one truth, but they each have a part of it. They each have the whole truth in the experience, but in languaging it, in putting it into words which are symbols of symbols, they may differ in a different approach. So think about different paths up to the mountains. One starts from the east, one starts from the west, one from the north, one from the south. But when you reach the top, the mystics of all traditions describe it in much the same way, that it's experiential, it's within, it's the same in all traditions. When we're beginning the path, we see the differences. We don't see the commonality. When we reach the summit of the experience of the self, all the traditions merge. When you reach that place, you can look at the Taoist tradition and say, this is what they're saying. The Buddhists, this is what they're saying. This is what the Christians say. This is what the Muslims say. They're all speaking the truth in limited and relative terms. And they're all pointing towards the experience of it. That's really what it's about, experiencing our union with the divine. And we can call it by many names. We may call it Allah, or Buddha, or Jesus, or God, or Ishvara. The truth is one. The paths are many. So long as we think ourselves as separate from God, there is good and evil. Once we accept ourselves as divine and see things from the perspective of the divine, then everything is consciousness. The concept of good and evil simply dissolves. So both are true. So long as we believe in separation and believe that I'm a body, that people are separate from me, I should do good things. I shouldn't kill people. I shouldn't steal money. But once you realize that I'm the self, I'm pure consciousness, I'm eternal and all pervasive, then there's no place you can go where Shiva is not. There's no such thing as good and evil. You transcend the concept of good and evil. Think about good and evil as a concept. Right. And what's good in one culture might be evil in another culture. So they're just concepts, right? But they're helpful concepts until we realize the truth. Then we let all the concepts go. Well, one of the early experiences I had, having been raised Catholic, and I was not just Catholic, I was a devout Catholic. I was an altar boy from the age of 7 years old. I was the person who gave the lectures at church. I was considering becoming a priest at one point, even went to a Franciscan seminary for my high school. It's 4 years studying with Franciscans. So I was a very devout Catholic. And when I went away to the university, I began to think for myself, and I began to question some of the teachings of the church and sort of fell away from the church. Started looking at Eastern religions for my spiritual path. So I had these conflicts living with Muktananda, living with a Hindu guru. A Hindu was like the worst for a Catholic. It was like the furthest away from Catholicism, all the different deities, gods, goddesses, but here I was living in an ashram, and people seemed to be worshiping a man, a human being. And this always felt really uncomfortable to me, because we always believed that Jesus was the only way, and Jesus was the only truth, and you can only get to heaven through Jesus. But here I was having an amazing experience with Muktananda. So there was this inner conflict. So we were chanting the mantra Om Namah Shivaya one day. We were chanting it when suddenly, and it's difficult to describe this, when suddenly my consciousness descended from my head to my heart. So I was no longer looking out through my eyes, but I seemed to be centered in my heart, resting in pure light, and I was surrounded by this body that seemed to be outside of itself. It's the only way I can describe it, but I was centered in my heart. And there was this beautiful, beautiful, radiant white light emanating from the distance, coming towards me and getting closer and closer and closer. And when it got close enough, I could see it was the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And the Sacred Heart was my chosen deity, my Ishtadeva. I always worshiped the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Jesus standing there with an open heart. And I could see that the love was coming out of his heart and entering into my heart. And I was just amazed. But the light kept coming closer and closer. And I peered inside of Jesus's heart. And inside of Jesus's heart was Muktananda sitting there on his throne. And the light was coming from his heart. And I was just absolutely amazed at the waves of light. And as the waves of light rolled over me, I was filled with love, filled with ecstasy. And I kept moving closer and closer. And I went into Muktananda's heart. And inside of his heart, I could see myself, David, sitting in meditation. And the light was coming from my own heart. And I was amazed. And I could hear Muktananda laughing. And he was saying, "What did you expect to find here? What did you expect?" So this really resolved my conflict between Muktananda and Jesus and my own self. I could see from my own experience, they were all one consciousness, one light, one truth. Just as an added benefit, when I came back to the awareness of my physical body, I came back and I was seated in the cave of my heart, and I could hear my body singing in tune. Now, as a kid, I was always the kid that was tone deaf. I couldn't sing. I couldn't hear the notes. And they would always tell me, act all enthusiastic in the choir, but don't make any sound because you're flat. But my body was singing in tune, on pitch, perfectly, without me doing anything. It was just singing. And since that time, I've been able to sing. I lead kirtans. It was another aspect of the miracle. It was opening the inner ear to hear and to appreciate music.
This has been the AJPAR Spiritual Journalist Podcast. Please like, share, and subscribe.